Welcome to HR Doctors. I'm super excited to have Steve back with me, one of my first returning guests. Steve, thanks for being here.
It's great to be here, Brent. Let's go.
Yeah, I'm excited to connect. So we recently went through a little bit of an exchange on LinkedIn. You posted a really interesting article about beware of the company that states they are firing hundreds or thousands of low performers. And here's why, which we'll touch on in a sec. Part of this was driven through the recent layoffs that we've been seeing in the market, which are having a huge impact. I've got some numbers here that I've pulled. There have been 1,409 companies since 2022 listed on layoffs, 265,611 employees. The interesting one that I saw that stood out to me is 364 tech companies with 105,000 layoffs listed through 2023 alone. So the overall number between the 2 years that they've, I guess, been producing this content is 265,000 people, with 100,000 of those people in the first 1.5 months of the year. Steve, what are you seeing? What are you taking from the numbers?
Yeah, there's another article that came out recently around how many of the companies that laid people off had big budgeted advertisements in the last Super Bowl.
Right.
And was that money well spent when it could have been spent to save the people? So, I think there's several features, as there always are when you see something big like this, and depending upon where you're looking at this. As you know, and as the listeners may know, most of my work history has been around technology companies, and they seem to be the ones with the highest numbers right now of staff reductions. Microsoft, Amazon, Google, even bigger numbers than they've done in, say, since 2008 when we went through the second mortgage crisis. And I think, one of the things to keep in mind when we're looking at this is we have a weird market right now where the visibility to the future is murkier than it's been in a while. We don't know where it's going. We've got that war in the Ukraine. We have residual supply chain catch-up issues around the world because of COVID. And it's created, change in consumer behavior, and the threat of and the concerns about a recession are creating different consumer behavior patterns. So all these businesses are sort of like, things are going on, among other things, right? And so technology companies are mostly people. That's what they are. 90% of the expense of technology companies are talent. And so in an uncertain market, it looked like what they're doing is saying, we really need to trim right now because the future is uncertain and we can't continue to run like this when our profits are down significantly. Right. And so let's try to trim our expenses to give us more runway until we can get a little more confidence in the future of the business. What really triggered me was all the companies, several high profile ones, saying, oh, we're using this as an opportunity to get rid of thousands of low performers, which to me is almost an admission of poor leadership. You have that many low performers. Number one, how can that possibly be?
Right.
So either you're hiring poorly, you're not developing, you're not managing performance very well, and you're failing to see that your main objective when you let people go should be to minimize the angst and the anger and help them get somewhere else. And when you label them low performers, you're mitigating their opportunity to get another job. You're potentially impacting their mental wellness and their self-confidence, not putting them in a place where they're going to feel good about themselves going out into the open market. And you're also triggering the potential to do something which another good practice in layoffs is mitigating lawsuits.
Right.
And if you're labeling people low performers, do you think that's really going to serve that purpose?
Right.
And so that really got me going. At the same time, I appreciate that, sometimes we have to make hard decisions. But the other side of this, Brent, and I'm curious to see, your perspective on this too, is if you're going to contemplate something like that, the ramifications in an organization, and I've been in some. I was at Cisco when we had to let 8,000 people go after the dot-com bubble in 2001, the dot-com bubble burst. That was brutal. And the shockwaves of that lasted for years. And the insecurity that the people who weren't let go felt lasted a long period of time. And so what you want to really try to do when you go through an exercise like that, now we'd never done that as a company when it was the first time we'd ever let a significant number of people go. And some of us had never even done a layoff before. And so what we learned is that if your employee population that's not impacted isn't convinced you tried to cut so many other expenses before people, okay, that is going to raise their own fears. And as we
Right.
all know, all the research shows great teams win when there's a high level of trust and psychological safety. And when you are not, cutting other benefits or reducing salaries across the board or closing offices or shutting down product lines that are unprofitable first, okay, before you get there, or trying to cut your real estate expenses or sell buildings and lease them instead of own them. If you're not trying to do everything first, then people are like, well, why did you just let people go so quickly? Or is this really a people first organization? And that takes a long time to win back that trust if you break it,
There's so many amazing layers of the onion, so to speak, to peel back there.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if we go back to the visibility of the layoffs and the perception of the layoffs, is part of it, do you think, the fact that social media has created so much visibility for us, so much? I mean, this isn't the first time there have been mass layoffs, right? Like in the past, there are, huge companies that you show up for work and thousands of people are getting pink slips in their cubbies and going home that day and not having jobs. I know in 28, it was it 2008 or there was a recession and there was layoffs. This is the largest scale of recent knowledge? Is it that it's so visible? Is it that it's in this space that seemed like untouchable, where there's just been so much demand and so much money? Like, what do you think about, what's happening right now that's making it so like in everybody's face right now?
Yeah, it's interesting, Brent. That's a really, really good call out. I think, yes, the evolution of employees and former employees feeling emboldened, if you will, to express their frustration, their angst, their concerns on social media is probably higher than it's ever been. We're comfortable, and there's more tools and there's more comfort in using those tools. I also think that the pandemic, in a way, served to question so many things about work we never questioned before. Like, why are we going in an office? Like, really, why? And why do we have to meet in person? Like, why can't we meet, remotely? What's the purpose of a 5-hour work, 5-day, work week? Like, where did that come from? Does that really make sense? And so we've been questioning that because we've hit a moment in time where we hit pause on the life we were leading. And we had a chance to step back and get some perspective. And I think that's really, really healthy. So amongst that moment in time, this happens. And, we've not been in a cycle in probably a decade or so where we've had this amount, right? Layoffs have always happened, but just really boom, really quick. And I think that's sort of, people's comfort to call out companies like, what are you doing? Like, what's going on, right now? And then while all this is going on, we see all the stuff going on at Twitter that's getting a lot of attention from people on how Elon Musk is, driving decisions that seem counter to all the best, research around culture and leadership and trust, and trying to build an environment where people do the best work. And so, yeah, it's really, I think there's a lot of factors. And the other thing that I have to say around this is, yes, the technology companies, that industry seems to be doing it more. And I think in part is because most companies know how hard it is to recruit. So they're always going to be recruiting, even if there's not an imminent need right now. And maybe that's come back to bite them a little bit. That strategy of trying to find the scarce engineer, was a really good idea in a better market, and now that's not a better market. Maybe that strategy doesn't fit, so we're going to have to revisit it. That's partially it. I think there's another thing, Brent, which we haven't talked about. We didn't even talk about it in our sort of, side conversations prior to going on air, and that is in technology industries. And again, I'm part of, I have a front row seat to this, and created part of the problem myself, or was part of the problem, and that is many companies, aside from the huge enterprise, so take the Googles and the Amazons and Apples out of the picture, and you take a company a size of, say 50 to 500, which is the majority of most of the organizations, so small, medium business. Most of those organizations are not expecting to be around in 100 years.
Right.
They're not. They're expecting to build and get bought or merge or, have an exit, and then people are going to leave and go on to do another adventure. So the outcome of that doesn't create an environment where people are really building better leadership and thoughtful leadership and thinking around, what's our talent strategy and how can we build a good culture, and we need to build good rapport with the employees for the long term. They're not thinking like that. And they haven't been trained that way, because they're thinking 5 to 10 years exit, I'm moving on to something different,
Right.
a new adventure. And so we've got a leadership deficit, which reveals itself when we see some really just really disappointing behavior in how these things are conducted, how they're communicated. People finding out in the middle of a call with a customer when their system gets taken down.
Right.
That's how they found out. Or some people find out on the news, or some companies announce we will be laying off 10% of the workforce in the next month. Why would you ever do that? Because you just
Right.
basically guaranteed productivity is ended. So just story after story, I stopped being freaked out about this because it's happened so many times. I'm getting sort of immune to it right now.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I really find one of the hardest things that I'm seeing for both individuals and for businesses is the visibility and the communication around what's happening. I think it's making it so hard for everybody. And I know this is going to maybe fork us off into the two different parts we're going to talk about, but I look, let's say, devil's advocate on the company's side. I mean, I'm a small business owner. I've never been a part of this as an employee or as an employer at a scale like this. And in some of the previous conversations I've been a part of over the last 15 years, I feel like there is a desire from the employee up to the employer about visibility, especially when the company's doing well. It's hey, we're making so much money here right now. I saw a hilarious post. It was hey, we hit 90 million in sales last year. Congrats to everybody. There's cupcakes in the boardroom on the 29th to celebrate. And it got posted out as you made $90 million last year and we're getting cupcakes. What? Right. And so it's there's so much, there's so much that goes into effectively running a business. There's a lot of risk that the small business, the medium business, I think people don't have any empathy or sympathy for the multi-million or billion-dollar companies when it comes to any hardships from an executive level. They just go, oh, boo-hoo, right. Your $1 million or multi-million-dollar salaries. Oh, you should be taking these pay cuts. But I think there's this desire for visibility and transparency to see the good, but not necessarily the same that I want to see the bad. And I think it's almost the opposite. The smaller the business is, the more willing the more we're willing to be transparent on hey, here's the position we're in right now. We're not doing great. We need to batten down the hatches. And, I think it's hard for an employer to get it right. And I don't think that absolves them of any responsibility, but it's so hard. And then obviously there's another discussion we can get into on what's realistic or fair for the employee on whether this is the scenario they're in or not, and just communication in a business, and then also within a layoff scenario. But I think even outside of layoffs, what are your thoughts on that visibility piece and transparency and communication? Because I think that's a huge crux of where a lot of this is coming from.
Yeah, completely agree. And what you're talking about is trust, Brent. That's at the end of the day, we're looking at all these things and how are they maintaining trust? How are they setting their team that they're keeping up for greater performance, the way these things are playing out? And let me relay a story to you that I think reveals some of the complexity of doing this as a leadership team with a company. When I was sitting in PMC Sierra in the heart of British Columbia, we're outside of Vancouver and Burnaby a number of years ago. This is probably 2005, 2006. We were facing a big problem. Number one, most of our business was in the US, but most of our staff was in Canada. And we had a currency fluctuation challenge where when the dollar would go up, or our cost of labor would be affected just because of the currency conversion, where the business was and where the employees were.
Right.
But that aside from the cases, we were in a market where our expenses were growing faster than our revenue was. And so we're like, what are we going to do? Because the market's getting tougher. This is right after the dot-com bubble burst, and the company had been doing really well. I joined, and they weren't doing so great after the dot-com bubble burst. And we're trying to figure out, how can we do this without having to let people go? So the first thing that we did was we said, let's do a full company shutdown during the holidays. Okay. And we found out if we did that, we would save $1 million a day. We're talking about 1,300 employees. And we gave everyone advance notice, and we said, over the holidays, we're going to just close down. Of course, there'll need to be some people in the systems, keeping the systems operating, but no one's going to be expected to do anything for the most part for 10 days. Okay. Sort of like before Christmas through New Year's. And the employees loved it, because when they came back, there wasn't a backlog of stuff for them to do. Now, some people were disappointed, saying, I wasn't going to take that time off, the extra time, and I don't appreciate you planning my vacation for me. Right. And unfortunately, we didn't give them enough notice. So then we said, come July for Canada Day and US 4th of July, we're going to close for another week and save another $1 million a day. And that, just doing that, if you can in your business, saved a ton of money. And we told the employees, we have to do this. Otherwise, we're going to have to consider harder decisions, without saying, lay people off. But yeah, business isn't good. And then we told the development teams and product and engineering, if you can make products that give us more money, we're not going to have to do these cuts,
right.
And so, create us some. So even despite doing that for a couple of years, we still weren't moving the top line fast enough. So that led us to have to undertake another really hard decision, which was to enter a development center in India. Now, the cost of an employee in India at the time, it's probably around the same, I would guess now, was for a vice president was 50%, and for a frontline person, it was 10%. Right. The cost difference, right? So, whoa, you can't ignore that. And so here's where the rub comes in. So we were sitting, I think it was an office in Ottawa, talking to the team of about 75 people and saying, we need your help. You ready for this? To help that team in India succeed. And the team was like, wait a second. If they succeed, we help them succeed getting us out of a job. Why would we do that? Yeah. Right. And so I was with the head of operations, this guy named Colin Harris, who's just a wonderfully, intelligent, great, insightful leader. He's like, guys, then make us product that gives us more revenue so we don't have to do this, But if we don't do that, the whole company's at risk of going down. Do you understand? It's not just you, right? And so for the next year that it took us to build that design center, we had multiple times, multiple teams and organizations try to take down that India site through, neglecting to give them some important information. So it looked like the India team was failing, and they would say, oh, look, those guys don't know what they're doing. Well, no, actually, you didn't help them because you kept this information away to make it look like. And so we had this, disabling response, which is completely understandable, right? That it felt to many of the North American design centers that India operation was a complete threat. And in some cases it might have been. But if we didn't do that, it was irresponsible for us as leaders. Otherwise, the whole organization is at risk, And so I don't know the extent of the thoughtfulness going into many of these organizations, but it's not easy. It's not easy. And it's like you're choosing between two, options that you wish you didn't have to choose from. They're going to have ramifications. They're going to have a hit to the trust. And I do think your original point in your question is really well taken, which is people want, they may not agree, but if you don't share the why of some of these decisions, I think you're really missing an opportunity. And every time that I've done that, it's like, hey, we have to do this because the vitality of the company's on the line. And here are the numbers. If you think there's a better way to organize this or other things that you think we should be cutting, please let us know, because we would like your input on that versus coming down from the mountains with some tablets that they don't understand. How did you come up with that math? And it's harder to do in big companies. The flow of information and the sense of transparency is a bit rougher. And in smaller ones at the time, we were only, maybe 12, 1,300. That wasn't so hard. We had a number of all company meetings and communications and Q&As and town halls to let people get their frustrations expressed, you know?
I'm going to, I guess, try to get the thought that's come to mind out of my head. And it totally centers around that trust piece. As a staffing and recruiting company, I talk to so many clients about the issues that they've had. Obviously, visibility on LinkedIn is better than it's ever been. And so we can see all these different stories. If I look at the small scale, I know that employees want to have visibility on what's going to happen. And if there's a reason something's not going to work out, I think it's fair to say that everybody would want to be able to know that, something's going to happen, that we're going to work with you. We're going to, try to support you through it. We're going to, compensate you. We're going to do everything we can to make sure that you're not overtly negatively impacted through this. And that, for many people, we're paycheck to paycheck. Like, how long is your runway? And we know how long it takes to find a new job. At the same time, I think the employer and employee relationship is talked about that it's built on trust, and it's so easy for both sides to break it. And then it's so hard for anybody on either side to go, that was an isolated situation. Like, how many companies have you heard of where a key player on the team, where to replace this individual is going to take a 4 to 8 to 12 week recruitment strategy with a 6-month onboarding. And this person's been in the team for 3, 5, 10, 15 years. And they come in and go with no previous discussions or warning. Hey, I'm giving you my 2 weeks notice. I want to do the right thing. So I'm going to give you my 2 weeks notice so I can really set you up for success. And it's like, what? I've had that conversation from clients so many times where they're like, I don't know what I'm going to do. We need your help. How can we bring someone new in? And I think, I've experienced this myself. I've had team members that have left, and we've had, months of conversations leading into trying to identify that, is it that you're the right person in the wrong seat, or is it just you're an awesome person on the wrong bus? And if we're going to transition you out, I only win if you help me find somebody to take your place, and even have you help me coach and onboard an interview. And that it would be foolish for me to negatively react if you come and say, hey, Brent, I just don't think this is right for me anymore. And I go, you know what? Well, you're right, and you're fired. But I think there's this huge fear piece from employees of being willing to be open and honest, because if I do react that way, what's the upside, and what is the percentage chance of, if I am open and honest, is it 90% or is it 10% that Brent's going to act in the right way? And even if it's 99%, that 1% could mean that I'm out of work for 8 weeks or for 6 months or for longer, depending on what the market's like in their role. And that could be the difference between homelessness or not. Right? It's just so scary as an employee. And then again, as an employer, I think sometimes there are situations where I think you're so right. We can get into this of has the organization done everything? And then even then, how visible does that transparency need to be? Maybe they have done everything, but there's no visibility to anybody. And is that something that's expected, or is it just to themselves, or is it just is so, I feel it's so hard that we want to create these employer relationships and partnerships on trust. And yet there's so many different things that either side can do that completely shatter that for everybody.
Yeah. And you're talking about the thing that I think about all the time, which is the continually evolving nature of the employer-employee relationship.
Yeah.
Let me ask you a question. It's sort of I'm baiting you a little bit here. If you're in a company that just let go 10,000 people, do you feel more secure or less secure after you see that happen? Are you more likely to look out for yourself, or are you more likely to trust the company that, oh yeah, they've done the right thing and I'm feeling better now that we got rid of all that, extra expense?
Yeah, I would assume the majority of the leftover people would feel less secure. There may be some outliers where they're oh, I know I'm safe, but the majority
100%.
For sure. Yeah.
100%. Even if your boss says, oh, don't worry, you're good. Really?
Yeah. Yeah.
Now,
today,
because now I'm taking on the work of 17 people that you just let go. Right. And so my number is going to come up at some point. So this is where, I think when the universe of talent, just speaking generally, sees that happen at the scale that has been, and maybe you're right, maybe the magnification has been over magnified because of social media and everything from quiet quitting to the latest thing I heard, which is rage applying. Have you heard this one?
Oh yeah. Yeah, you
And
see it.
so,
I've applied to 1,000 jobs and not getting
right,
any
right.
hits. It's like, well, no,
There's one guy on TikTok who literally has applied to 400 jobs and has given the whole anatomy of the whole thing. Super interesting. And he's like, I got a kid, I got kids, I got, expenses, like you said. He doesn't have a long runway to things are getting really in a very precarious place. So what I think when I see this happen at the scale and it gets the attention that it's getting, and let's layer on automation's coming, artificial intelligence, the robots taking over all these jobs, which is the worst. We talked about this in the last episode we did. The worst marketing campaign in history is the future work, because we're scaring everyone that skills are changing so fast. You layer that on top of this environment. I can't see an outcome that doesn't include everyone sort of saying, I need to take care of myself first. I absolutely do. And loyalty to a company, I got to be loyal to me and my family, number one, and I'm going to control my destiny. And if I see something that's better for me, I'm going to do it. And so I think when the economy does get a little more certain, we're going to see even more attrition than we've seen, because there's a lot of people just holding on until something better. And here's another thing, Brett, which I think I'm starting to talk about more, because it's a big dysfunction in the way that we've modeled work, and that is compensation. Everyone knows now that if you move, you will get more money than if you stay. 90% of the time, and all the research is showing that 3.5% to 4% to 0% annual salary budget that we have, woo, can't wait for that. But if I go across the street, I could get 9%, I could get 8%, or I could get 15%. Right. Now, you can't always parlay that. There's a lot of people who are, and they're talking about it like, oh, I've done it 3 times in the last 3 years. And I started at 50 and now I'm at making 85K. Like, why wouldn't I do that? Because companies are not budgeting for people to leave as fast as they are, and they don't have a budget. And this, talking to tons of companies and hiring managers in the whole recruiting process. Is there always we cannot pay more than this? No, it's like, we need to pay what we need to pay. And sometimes, we'll throw in a signing bonus and we'll do something. But when it comes to annual increases, there's definitely a finite limit, right? And so that broken model for the highly, mobile workforce is getting completely taken advantage of right now. Yeah. And companies, I will say there are a few companies, and I sit on the board of a few, that are like, okay, we used to look at salaries once a year. Maybe we need to look at them 4 times a year, because the market's wonky right now. It's changing quickly. So, and all that stuff around how you pay me goes to my trust. How you treat other people goes to my trust. How you conduct a reduction goes to my trust. And so the word that we haven't used is, I feel like jobs are becoming almost transactional now, and that how can you expect to ask people to be more loyal after you go through something like you just went through? Like, how can you possibly do that? It's like, that's not part of the game anymore. And it used to be a formula. And I was at a conference recently in an industry, healthcare, where there's just a lot of churn and a lot of turnover. And I asked people, what their biggest frustrations were, and it's like, oh yeah, people moving. And I said, how many of you have kids who are in the job market in the last 3 to 4 years? And so about a third of the room raised their hand. I said, how many of you had them come home at some point for the holidays and say, and they're in a really good job and a really good company, and they came home and said, yeah, I think I want to do something different. And half their hands went up. Right. And I said, how did that make you feel? And they're like, terrified, because that's not how they measured their relationship to work. Right. And I said, so those are the kids that you raised, okay, with your values and, whatever. And that's the demographic that terrifies you, that you're trying to employ right now, is that it's a changing. Yeah, it's interesting for now, and commitment to someone today in that 20 to 35-year-old age range. That's very different. Unless you're owning your own thing, your commitment's going to be to your own decisions, not to someone else, I think. And the more we see these kinds of layoffs, I think the more we're going to see people say, no, I want to take control of my own destiny more than giving you control over my destiny, right?
It just makes me feel that the narrative in this system is so broken, where, I want to say 30, 40, 50 years ago was go to school and get a job. And back then, when it was like survival and security, that made sense. And that's not like the age that we're in anymore. And I think, I don't know if it's the school system or whoever it is, fails to highlight, or even today, that, you know, at the end of the day, employers hire people. We put a employment contract in place that I'm going to compensate you X, and the X is going to be for your Y, which is the work and effort and energy that you're going to put into this job, whether it's mental or physical labor. And as a result of that, as a business, and I don't care whether you're a frontline salesperson who's driving revenue, whether you're a blue collar worker who is, you know, running the production lines and producing the product, or whether you're in an admin support position, an HR position, that everybody's collective efforts are to create profitability for the company. And that, you know, I was talking to Dave Ulrich the other day about the number one job of HR is to create companies that win in the marketplace, that make money. Because if the company's highly profitable, and I don't know if this is the case with all these IT companies where all these tech layoffs have come from, but if they, and I mean, I think some of them are hugely profitable, so maybe that's a paradigm in itself. But if the company is hugely successful to making tons of money and it's growing, I would assume your risk of layoff and termination is significantly decreased. And as a result, you know, how do you create security for yourself as an employee? It's to find ways to continually contribute more to the bottom line of the business, whether you're a support person, supporting layers away from the direct level of compensation. Again, I feel like maybe this is something that is grossly missed in our education system of like, you know, yeah, go to school to get a job to do what? Like, we talk about fulfillment, we talk about all these things. We also talk about like the employer value proposition of, it seems the communication I continuously get from my clients is, you know, everything outside of compensation for the employee isn't taken into consideration of their total package. From an employer, it is. As me as the employer, you know, the constant communication I get is I'm offering vacation. We have wicked benefit plans. We do health and wellness. We have like all these different perks. We've got work from home. We do like cool events. I try to do everything I can, but that is almost just viewed as an expectation. And that outside of that, whenever it's compensation, it's my job, it only focuses on the one thing, and the additional perks and benefits rarely come in where they say, you know, oh, my benefits need to be like, it just seems like there's this like failure to help articulate or create visibility to the employee that is ultimately where these things come to. And that part of, I would assume, these layoffs is because the company is looking at that grandiose scale of how much money we're spending and how much money we're making. And that, like you said, in tech, if the only way that I can affect that is I know over the next year or 2 or 5 years, we're not going to make more money, I need to reduce my workforce, because that is the number one place that I can reduce my expenses, which is going to mean profitability.
Unless you see that if we can hold the fort through whatever uncertainty we're going through and hang on to these people, we'll have an edge on our competitors because we won't have to re-recruit.
Right.
We've already got the people, right? Yeah. Yeah, I agree with you, Brent. I mean, I spent my whole career trying to sell the culture, trying to sell the environment as a place, as an upside, the quality of life, the quality of my leadership team beyond the cash, right? And I've even had conversations, I'm sure you have too, like, hey, if that dollar number on your salary is the most meaningful thing to you, then you need to go to the place where you think you can realize it. But you know, I've worked in most technology companies in the States. Equity is a big part of it, stock. Right. And it's a risky, component where sometimes there's no guarantees unless it's an RSU that you're going to get shares. And so that's a big part of, hey, if the company wins, that you win. And you get a sense of, you can model that out. And I've seen people play around with that, but there's so many other components, like you say, time off is a huge one, my training and my growth and my development, right? And are you going to make me better for the future? That's what really worked for us at LinkedIn. That's the only way that I think we're able to compete against people who could pay more, was we're going to make this the most interesting job you've ever had. And can't pay you in cash, but if we perform and we solve this problem worth solving that we're trying to do here at LinkedIn, then I think you're going to be in a very strong financial position for you and your family and your future. And being on a winning team is going to serve you really well because they go, oh, you were there, helping build. And so, and fortunately we delivered on that,
Yeah.
for the people that believe that. But yeah, this whole, contract, I think, is employer employee. Like, I give you, you give me. We're seeing a metamorphosis of that, I think, as we live and breathe right now, which is really interesting,
Do you
and
think,
uncomfortable.
do you think that it is a 50-50 share, or maybe like a 33-33-33, where it continues to be an employer issue? The majority of my clients are constantly investigating and trying to identify better ways to increase their employee value proposition, their support structure. I mean, we've got a couple of clients that I know that have tried hiring support workers and social workers to provide additional resources to their teams to have in-house. I think a lot of companies are heavily invested in that. Again, there's the employee side too. I mean, there's equal share to a degree, but is it both parties' like responsibility to make sure that they're equally invested, or will it always be more of an employer responsibility to try to create retention, to try to ensure that they're engaging their workforce? And then from an employee standpoint, your job is, one, continue to upskill, continue to be able to provide value and ensure that you've got that safety, or it's your job to constantly have a plan B, to constantly be looking for changes, to, have a mindset where you're going to be an entrepreneur 3 or 5 or 10 years from now, because that's the safest place to be, where you can be in that position where you can control your destiny, self-employed, start a business? Or does some of that also fall on the system, the government, the schools, on how we bring the new generation of people up to make sure that this partnership is far more mutually beneficial? Because it seems like it's broken. It seems like people on all sides are having a hard time.
Yeah. Well, let's add a layer to the complexity that I think contributes. And that is, we've seen in the last 20 years or so, more new industries be created, whether it is biometric feedback testing, or whether it's these gig economy opportunities, or these platforms like a scooter business or an Uber or an Airbnb, that are not, massively radically new industries, but they're taking a piece of an industry and going a different direction. That fundamentally, I think, has created a dynamic of great, all these new industries and opportunities. Awesome. While at the same time creating massive fear, what is the right choice? There's too many choices. And what if I make the wrong choice? And did I choose the wrong one coming here? And I can see through social media all the benefits and perks that they're getting over there, all the cool projects they're solving that I couldn't see before. I didn't know what I was missing. Now I know what I'm missing more than ever before.
Right. Yeah.
And all these new industries. And so let's take a pause and talk about the healthcare industry again. I've told you I've done a lot of work with hospital associations around the world. What they struggle with is nurses today have more ways to make money other than a hard, uncomfortable shift in a hospital than ever before. I could be telehealth. I can be a travel nurse. I could be a visiting nurse. I could go into these new concierge nurse businesses where it's not a grind, and we go into homes. It's just different. And hospitals never had to deal with a demographic that had that choice before. Right. And while at the same time, because of the pandemic, primarily, the angst and frustration that's coming into a hospital, I can't be with my dying family member because of COVID. I have to wear this mask. I have to get it back. They've bore the brunt unfairly for a lot of frustrations aimed at, policy decisions at the government level, whatever. To the point where many hospital associations have had to start providing violence prevention training for their staff.
Yeah, they have to be technicians in their role, plus therapists and police officers and security guards all in one.
The nurse is I didn't sign up for that.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, all the teachers are I didn't sign up to be a Zoom instructor. That's not filling my tank.
Yeah.
That's not, my jam. So,
paramedics is another one that have been hugely impacted as well.
Yeah. And the Economist had an article a few weeks ago. The title was, "It's a bad time to have a heart attack."
Right.
Because the number of paramedics is lower than it's ever been around the globe, that in the UK, the response time has gone from 20 minutes to an hour on average. That's just frightening, right? And that's sort of one of those domains where failure shouldn't be an option. And that's socialized medicine in the UK too, unlike the States. These things are also contributing to this environment, that we're in. And I want to go back to something you said, because I think we're limiting our choices if we just look at employer-employee. The truth is, as an employer, your job is to create something of value. Okay.
Yeah.
That's your job. Having employees is one way to do it. Having contractors, having outsourced providers, having partnerships, having other communities help you is an option. So it doesn't always have to be employees. In fact, I was on the golf course one time with the CEO. This was in BC. We were on the golf course. CEO, no, it was a CFO. I'm sorry. And he, his whole organization, the technicians of his organization had just gone on strike. And I was like, how's it going? He goes, I love my job. Just love my job, except for the people. I thought it was a great comment. And it was like, yeah, man, people are complex and difficult. It's a beautiful thing, but it's kind of more of an art form. And I think, that dynamic of, we as employers have to come up, I think, with different creative ways to create value. It doesn't always have to be an employee. If you truly believe, and employers, I think, get stuck when they say, well, I have to own the employee. They can't work for anyone else but me. Really? Why?
Yeah.
Why? I mean, all the research is showing the more people have variety in their, day-to-day experience, the more their creative, output. So, and that's not to say people should have 3 to 5 jobs, but, having a hobby, belonging to community organizations, people tend to perform better. Why not having 2 different jobs in 2 different industries? Why couldn't we get to the same, conclusion, So I'm pushing the envelope here a little bit, Brent, because I think that we're stuck a little bit and we need to look for other ways. And I think we have to appreciate that people are probably going to feel less loyal. And, that example of a company you gave earlier was like, oh no, we lost Susan. She's the only one that knows how to do this. It's going to take us 8 to 12 weeks or, several months. Well, that's on you, because
100%.
You didn't cross-train Susan. Someone else knew what Susan's doing. You made her job. You made her so indispensable that she parlayed that. And we have to be mindful of that. Any job today that takes 2 years for someone to learn, they're going to leave after 2.5 years, or 3, and then you're screwed. So how can you re-engineer work to expect people to go and this is where I get into this whole, like, who's responsible, right? Because that's what we like to do as humans, like, who's the, that young generation or those schools that don't know what they're doing. Schools are not delivering what some businesses want because the businesses can't tell the schools what they need.
Mm-hmm.
And so the school's like, we want to deliver. And so, schools, I think, should deliver great soft skills, which Josh Burson has called power skills, which I think is a great name. And the company should deliver the hard skills.
Right.
And I think we should see, someone said this, I can't remember who it was, but it was brilliant. They said to me, the name of a business in the future, Steve, is business school, because you're going to have to get in that business. You can't expect plug and play anymore.
Yeah.
And in the healthcare industry, think about this. Not only do they have a supply of nurse problem, they have a brand of that being a cool profession problem. So their pipeline is going to shrink, and they're going to have to go and sell being a nurse when they didn't have to before.
Right.
That's a new challenge, right? And so I think we're all going to have to look at our pipeline differently, and the lines between education institutions and employers, I think, are going to start to blur. At LinkedIn, I'll tell you, the way we solved our recruiting challenge significantly was stopping to recruit in the mid-career range of sort of like intermediate senior manager, and massively recruited the new grad and grow those.
Yeah.
And it was when we were hit around 1,000, 1,500, 2,000 people that we could support that model. But that was so much easier for us to recruit on campus. And we gave schools our projects. Hey, can you solve this problem on campus? And we'll give you some of our executives to come co-teach with you so we can get in there. And that was a laboratory for not only technical solutions, but also for us to get visibility to talent. And I think this world that we're seeing, and we've touched on a number of things that are happening right now that are substantially different, is going to cause us to have to have those lines get blurred, and as employers get in there to the schools more. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I remember you brought that up when we spoke last time and thought it was super impactful. I mean, one of the greatest challenges we see here in Vancouver is the skill gap, and employers and our clients are willing to pay above market rates to hire an absolute like game changer, high performer, top 1 or top 5% employee who's got industry experience, position, experience, and come in and hit the ground running. And there's a lot of obstacles that overcomes, where you're not going to hire somebody, you're going to invest all this time into training, because you're still going to have to train that person to find out 3 or 6 months later that they say, you know what, I'm just not feeling it. It's not the right industry for me, or it's not the right job.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a huge factor. At the same time, it's not realistic or viable for every company out there to pay 5, 10, 15, 20, 30, $40,000 above whatever the market rate is. And so I 100% agree. It's something we go through fairly frequently in my, of late. I had a discovery call with a client who said, I want to hire a salesperson for our organization. We want them to have this much experience, this much industry experience. And okay, well, like, what you're looking for, you're probably looking at having to pay somewhere between 80 and 100K for the base and the commission plan and all that. And they were like, oh, we were kind of looking for closer to the 45, 50 range for the base, but, really lucrative commission plan. And it's like, well, any successful sales guy out there or gal who's making 100 or 150K isn't going to leave to take that chance with you. Right. But if you have the ability to train and coach and onboard, and you can find somebody who's got an entrepreneurial mindset, who's looking for that opportunity, maybe wants to run their own business someday, or is highly driven and motivated by like the thrill of going through that process, if you can wrap your head around that, then you could hire some really amazing people. And then my favorite thing was, I asked him, who's the most successful guy in your company right now? It was this one guy here. Okay. What was his background? Well, he was a teacher. And it was like, what do you like, you're asking me to hire this thing that you think is going to solve your problem. And yet the high performing person you have is high aptitude, high motivation, was a great person, had great soft skills. They came in, desire to learn, and you created this pathway for them. Yeah. And I think, as you said, I think it's probably one of the biggest things as a shift for the businesses is really building that business school. And like you said, not expecting that they're going to have this super long life in the company. If you can build that for them, fantastic. And I think for the employee, what I'm seeing more is that I think the onus isn't so much on getting all this education on the front end and then coming in expecting to get high value. It's get whatever education you need to get that past that barrier of entry, to get into that entry point in an organization, learn within an organization, and then start figuring out like what further education you need that's going to like exponentially, launch your career. And if anything, then also maybe understanding as an employee that there maybe isn't as much security as we would like, and that you can create that through being high functioning, high performing, highly involved and engaged in communicating with the internal team, but also understanding that it's probably in your best interest to be financially responsible, live within your means. And I don't mean don't live like a good life, but, put some money away, get some investments going, pay yourself first. Like, there's probably 100 books we could pull that would all talk that stuff. That is something that's not taught, through the education system. And if the greatest challenge that we're seeing from an employee side is that these layoffs are happening, and that some of these people are making huge sums of money and are still paycheck to paycheck. And like, you're putting yourself in a really tough position, one, where it might be really hard for you to get back to that level. And two, like, those expenses don't stop. You got the car payment, the mortgage, all these different things. Like, I just fear for people that haven't, either been given or haven't sought the information in that space.
Brent, I want to go back to something you said before you mentioned what you just did, which was the company. You asked a question. This is a question I always love to ask, like, who is the highest performing person doing this right now? And where did they come from? Yeah. And it was completely non-traditional. It wasn't the script that you were given to go hunt. It was something totally different. And that's actually the source of my next book that I'm in the process of writing right now, which is, we so undervalue the anatomy of skills. And having built LinkedIn in the shadows of all those giants that could pay more, we had to put people in roles that on paper they were not qualified to do. Again and again and again, these people outperformed. And it was so exciting to see that. But what was also happening is, and if you ask any executive this, the answer is almost always the same. when have you been most excited in your career journey? And you give them a sort of like a subset of, multiple choice. When you've been, master of your craft, you learn how to do something over 2, 3, 4 years, and you're really, really good at it. Or when you're asked to take on something you'd never done before, you're kind of scared, and your boss threw you into something, and you're like, I don't know how to do this. And you sure you want to give this to me? And they said, yeah, because I know you can crush it. And you're like, well, I don't know. And you took it on and you did crush it. And it was like unlocking energy you didn't know you had. And that is what I think in a lot of technologies, they tap into more than these traditional businesses. They're putting people in roles that are big stretch, opportunities, and they're unlocking enormous energy. And that's so powerful when you're going through crazy, like a lot of these companies are, to be doing that at scale. But that's not how we've designed work. We only hire people, like someone told me, and stop me if we said this on the last podcast, people say, we don't do talent acquisition, we do experience acquisition. That's what people want. I want to hire for experience. I'm not hiring talent. Talent means you don't have the experience and you can train it. And I think most companies, I don't know why, they're just too conservative, they're too nervous. But, if you can remind them of that story, and this is a whole podcast, I think, we should think about exploring, or you should think about, like, all those people, that salesman, get them in here and say, how did that happen? And what happened, and what can, because there's a lot of teachers who would love to pivot into something different right now, a lot, who are just feel like beaten down, and all the questions, the parents that are questioning their, moral fiber, you don't know what you're doing. And that's it's awful being in a job where everyone thinks they know how to do it better than you do. And that's a lot of what teachers are facing right now. But I think that's a solution that when I look at the future of recruiting, Brent, it's going to be skills-based, not experience-based. Like, we know we can't hire someone with it. It's like when someone says, I want all that and I want to pay nothing for it. It's like, okay, great. I'll have that person for you in, I don't know, 3 years. Does that work for you? Like, that's how long it's going to take. Or what we can do is get creative and say, what skills are needed for this without the experience? And maybe there's a way that we can find someone who can get up to speed quicker than someone who knows nothing, right? Not as fast as someone who's really good at it, but maybe because they haven't done it before, they're going to be super psyched about it. It's just something I think about this a lot. And I think we're going to be forced to have more of those stories happen because of the shortage of supply. People are going to have to take risks on more people. And I think they're going to be pleasantly surprised.
Yeah, I 100% agree. Mm-hmm. Well, let's circle the wagons back to the start of our conversation as we come to the end of our chat, which has been fantastic. But the article that we connected on that you had shared was "Beware the company that states that they are firing hundreds or thousands of low performers, and here's why." Mm-hmm. And then through our discussion, you brought up a really awesome point, which was our organizations looking at everything they need to cut before they make those decisions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then just the whole host of complexities around that, right? That, I think this is our moment, right? For creativity. And I think we need to take a close look at, is that the agreement, the employer-employee agreement, is it going through a change? And what does that mean for you on both sides, wherever you stand in that relationship?
Yeah. What do you think? Like, what were some of the, I guess with that specific article, like what were some of the red flags that you were seeing? Because I thought it was really interesting that the company was externally saying, we're using this as an opportunity to trim fat. Yeah. And I think it was probably with like decent intentions, where it was maybe like a shareholder or a value statement of like, we're going to try to save face. Yeah. But inherently, you were bang on that it is hugely devaluing the people that they're letting go, and being very, I don't know if it's derogatory, but just not being fair to the people that are exiting the company.
Yeah, I think it's really devaluing the mindfulness of a good investor. So you're telling me you're letting thousands of people go, like, good for you. Yeah, get all those low people out. Oh, what does that mean about your leadership? You're also showing us your hand that you're not a people first, and you're leading with cost cutting and not your good leadership for the future, which as an investor would make me pause, right? Like, that's really pretty short-sighted to handle it that kind of way. And I hope that we can learn from some of these lessons to, raise the bar, or we're just going to live with the fact that this is going to be a more transactional employer-employee relationship going forward, like you're plug and play.
I
And
think as soon as you like shared that article and I read it, I would argue that I don't know what the number would be, but a lot of people would read it and just be like, oh yeah, great. Like, it goes over their head. But as soon as you said, by saying this, you're now saying this, and also it shows poor leadership. How did those people even get there? Like, there's so many ripples
yeah,
that if that's what you did and you trimmed fat, well, where did the fat come from? Right? Like, how did you get there in the first place?
How do we know what happened again? Yeah, right.
Yeah, right. Like,
Yeah.
and then it's clearly these are just, blind spots and weaknesses that you're willing to live with. And we're like, there were so many pieces that come, and I hadn't seen that before. And I thought it was very like compelling to go, if that's actually what happened, then you have a way bigger issue as opposed to like the other. And I guess this is another piece that you alluded to, because I said, well, what's the right way? Like, what is the right way then? Because I have no idea. I've not had to go through it. I'm not in the space. And you framed with that, like, our organization's looking at everything they need to cut, and you highlighted a bunch of things. And I think it's even, we saw the crying CEO years back, or maybe a year or whatever, where he posted that picture of how he had to go through layoffs, and they're traumatic and challenging. But again, then people are saying, well, why don't you not take a paycheck? Why don't you, do these things? Like, what are some things that you feel a company should do or consider, or whatever it may be, as we close this out, if that is a path that they're going to take? And maybe the last piece to that is are these all things that should be visible, or is the expectation just that whether it is visible or not, that an organization should be doing this before impacting, thousands or hundreds of thousands of people?
I think if you want to be a transparent organization towards the goal of building trust, 100%, you need to be telling people everything that you've tried to do. Your expenses are, whether it's real estate, it's benefits, it's executive salaries, it's perks. I've worked at places where the free soda just stopped. It caused an insurrection, and people started like doing memes like, well, should we just use one, piece of toilet paper instead of two? And people like, really reacting the wrong way on some of this stuff. Or, things like, free rides, or cut down on business travel. That's another big one. Okay, we are just going to go all virtual. Business travel has been less during the pandemic, and the airlines industry has been hurt because of that. But there's so many things that you can try to do. And I gave the example of a shutdown. Close your offices for the holidays, or for the middle of the year, for around holidays. Give your employees notice on that, or make them take vacation, because sometimes vacation policies have, the money's already been saved, so you can have people burn that down, so you don't have to save as much money. There are a lot of things to do, and if you're not sure, ask your employees, what can we do to save expenses so we don't have to do staff reductions? Like, what do you think?
Right.
Whether it's, more efficient light bulbs, or, move to an electric car, fleet versus gas. I don't know what it is. Right. But there's so many things that organizations should be doing if they really want to believe and have their employees believe their employee first. Right.
Yeah, that would be such like a huge trust piece too, and such a great collective, bring everybody together. If 6 months out, or whatever that time frame is, you can say, guys, we're going in the wrong direction.
Yeah,
we need to come together. If anybody's got any thoughts on how we can be better at what we do, and if we get to this point, how we can go through it together. And if through that you come out of it stronger, then you will have some phenomenal people on your team that really truly like trust that they're not just going to one day with no notice get that pink slip that says, hey, unfortunately, we tried everything we could. We never talked to me, like, clearly you didn't try everything. I think that's such like a huge value proposition and trust factor if you're able to do that. That's great advice.
And I will say this, Brent, having done more layoffs than I'd like to say that I had, if you've never done it before, it's really scary, and it's so easy to, trip up. And I've published a bunch of blogs, if you're interested, just doing layoffs the right way. Steve Cadigan, I've got a bunch of stuff out there to sort of help you, do. We didn't talk about how to talk to the people that aren't being let go. We didn't talk about how to treat the people you're letting go, beyond just, don't say that they're low performers, but I am seeing some pretty progressive ways that companies are executing that. Airbnb, when the pandemic hit, did a layoff so elegantly and so professionally that they built more loyalty by letting people go than hurt loyalty. And the people being let go felt fiercely loyal because they were treated so well, and they converted the whole engineering team to become an outsourced recruiting team. Unbelievable, right? And so when things turned around, guess who came running back?
Right.
Those people, right? And they were devastated to have to let them go. And that Brian Chesky, I think, is the CEO. I mean, that was such a great testament to their culture and how they did that. And it's the hard times when you build trust. Not to avoid a hard decision, but it's how you handle those hard things, right? And we saw during the pandemic, some companies taking advantage of situations to try to get a profit, or some companies giving away stuff because they wanted to do the right thing, you know? Right. And so, yeah, I mean, these moments really serve, and that's what I ended my article with. That point is like, pay attention, because how your leadership in these organizations are handling this, you know, is going to determine whether they're worthy of your services in the future. You know, look at the pedigree of decisions and of these people. Yeah.
Amazing. Steve, so good to connect with you again.
Same. Thanks for having me on, Brent. This is a really good topic.
Yeah, it was awesome. Well, thanks again, and look forward to our next chat.
You bet.